So you got out of the military in 2011. This is how I understand the genesis of the book that comes out today, the Fort Bragg Cartel. You get out in 2011. You're a reporter. At some point, you start to understand that there are a lot of deaths at Fort Bragg, which is America's biggest Army base, home of the Special Forces. And you start to investigate those deaths.
That's right. I first read about a double homicide on Fort Bragg that took place at the tail end of 2020. Just an ordinary article in the New York Times that said that these two veteran special operations soldiers, Billy Lavigne and Timothy Dumas, have been found murdered on a remote training range at Fort Bragg. They've both been shot to death and their bodies have been dumped in the woods. I also read that Billy Lavigne was a Delta Force operator. And in all my time reporting on the military, working as a war reporter, and then before that serving in the Army myself, I had never heard of a Delta Force operator being in the news for any reason, because it's the most secretive and elite unit in the entire military. And the police were saying that this was believed to be a double homicide from a drug deal gone wrong. And so I knew that there had to be more to the story, because, you can imagine if, like, let's say a CIA agent was found shot to death and dumped in a park in Maryland or something like that, and the police were saying it was a drug deal. I mean, that's the level of secrecy, and that's how elite Delta Force is as a military unit.
What is Delta Force?
Delta Force is what's called a special mission unit. It is an Army unit. It's part of what's called the Joint Special Operations Command. It was created in the late 1970s to be an elite counterterrorism force for things like hostage rescue. For many years, they were obsessed with the problem or the danger of loose nuclear weapons and drilled constantly for scenarios in which they would be called upon to secure a loose nuclear weapon. This is all pre 9/11. After 2001, after the war started in Iraq and Afghanistan, Delta Force grew quite a bit and came to have a much more prominent role in U.S. military operations. And what they primarily specialize in are clandestine operations, covert operations, or what we might call black operations. That's Delta Force, and it's headquartered at Fort Bragg.
They get no publicity.
None. I actually looked into this when I was writing the book to see if they had ever been talked about in the 20 years that the U.S. had been at war since 2001. And I found that, in fact, they were talked about in the context of the 2004 Abu Ghraib scandal and had been implicated in the abuse of prisoners in Iraq. Other than that, for 20 years, they kept their name completely out of the news.
So there are other units famously that have worked with Hollywood filmmakers a lot, whose members retire and go on talk shows, including this one. And, so you sort of know quite a bit about the SEALs, for example, the various SEAL teams and their training, et cetera. But has there ever been a Delta operator in public talking about the training or the missions or anything like that?
There are former Delta Force officers who I've seen occasionally talk on TV. But as far as the regular enlisted guys go, their culture really is, the saying that they have that I've heard repeated is that, SEALs write books, Delta guys write history, something to that effect. It's very much part of their culture not to come on TV shows and not to talk and not to write books.
Interesting. Thereby increasing the mystique. And I think the assumption that we all have is that they're, because they're the most secretive, they are the most impressive.
They're very impressive in certain ways. The level of physical fitness that you have to have to be selected to be an operator is very impressive. Marksmanship, other skills that they have. Very tough people for the most part. But as I talk about extensively in the book, the unit has, I think declined in recent years in terms of its culture.
So let's begin with the story of the Delta operator Billy Lavigne and the man with whom he was found dead. Who killed them and why?
That's the question that animates this book from the beginning to the end. I mean, although I talk a lot about military history, I talk a lot about foreign policy. Really, it's a murder mystery. This book is at its heart. And the question is, who killed those two guys? And the fact is that there are many, many possible suspects. And that kind of is what made it such a rich topic for exploration. It turns out that Billy Lavigne, 18 months before he himself was found murdered, had killed a guy at his house in Fayetteville. In fact, he had shot and killed his best friend and fellow Green Beret, a guy named Mark Leshikar, right in front of Mark Leshikar's daughter, who was about 6 years old at the time. And the police, the local police, the sheriff's department, the district attorney of Cumberland County, North Carolina, and the U.S. Army Criminal Investigations Division completely covered up that murder. And I use that word covered up advisedly. I'm actually an attorney myself, so I don't use it lightly, but I devote the first two chapters of the book to showing what the evidence was against Lavigne and how that case was adjudicated and how he was not even placed under arrest. He was just lightly questioned and let go that same night on the grounds that it had been supposedly a justifiable homicide, when in fact that theory, that defense was definitively contradicted by the physical evidence. So Lavigne, having previously killed a guy, then goes on to commit 4 or 5 felony offenses in Fayetteville over the next 18 months, including aggravated assault with a deadly weapon for shooting at a guy in the streets of Fayetteville, manufacturing controlled substance for cooking crack in his house, lots of weapons charges. He'd even been arrested for harboring an escapee, which is a new one to me. And in every case, the DA had dropped the charges against him.
Who was Billy Lavigne?
He was a Delta Force soldier. He had done more than 12 deployments, more than a dozen deployments in his career. He wasn't a high-level officer in the Delta Force, but he was a veteran operator who had deep experience in America's classified assassination programs in Iraq and Syria and in Afghanistan. So that was the reason why I think he was dealt with such leniency by the authorities.
Why did he shoot his best friend to death?
It's very mysterious why he did that. Both of them had severe drug problems. This is one thing. Lavigne was not a one-dimensional character by any means. He's someone whose military career and whose downward trajectory I reconstruct in the book because I think it's so illustrative of what's happened to our military over the past 20 years. He was such a great example of what has happened. He developed very severe PTSD, moral injury. He came to believe that the wars in which he was participating were morally wrong. He had severe substance abuse issues, very severe. He was smoking crack every day and doing a lot of other drugs as well.
Wait, while he was a Delta operator, he was smoking crack every day?
Yes. And I learned that that's not that unusual, to my surprise.
But my understanding was, and your description suggests that these guys are like basically Olympic athletes whose physical condition is going to be monitored, I assume, by the unit doctor or somebody.
Well, operators have a particular type of physical fitness that you really only find in the Army, which is the kind of guy who can, run a 2-mile run in 12 minutes, but also smoke a pack a day. And get drunk 5 times a week.
Yeah.
I mean, they're very,
just
very
savages.
This is just savages. Yeah. So
that's impressive. But this guy was maintaining his training schedule while smoking crack every day.
Yes. And, I was shocked to the degree to which, because not only, I served in the conventional part of the military, not in the special forces, and I had also been out for more than 10 years. So I was very, very surprised when I started investigating Fort Bragg and learning the extent to which cocaine use is normalized in the Green Berets, not just in Delta Force, but in all of the Army Special Forces, which is a much larger organization. Than Delta Force is pretty small. But the Green Berets is thousands of troops, and people just people that live in this community, live in Fayetteville or live in Moore County. To them, it's just understood that this is just part of the lifestyle.
Hate to brag, but we're pretty confident this show is the most vehemently pro-dog podcast you're ever going to see. We can take or leave some people, but dogs are non-negotiable. They are the best. They really are our best friends. And so for that reason, we're thrilled to have a new partner called Dutch Pet. It's the fastest growing pet telehealth service. Dutch.com is on a mission to create what you need, what you actually need, affordable, quality veterinary care anytime, no matter where you are. They will get your dog or cat what you need immediately. It's offering an exclusive discount, Dutch is, for our listeners. You get $50 off your vet care per year. Visit Dutch.com/Tucker to learn more. Use the code Tucker for $50 off. That is an unlimited vet visit. $82 a year, $82 a year. We actually use this. Dutch has vets who can handle any pet under any circumstance in a 10-minute call. It's pretty amazing, actually. You never have to leave your house. You don't have to throw the dog in the truck. No wasted time waiting for appointments, no wasted money on clinics or visit fees, unlimited visits and follow-ups for no extra cost, plus free shipping on all products for up to 5 pets. It sounds amazing, like it couldn't be real, but it actually is real. Visit Dutch.com/Tucker to learn more. Use the code Tucker for $50 off your veterinary care per year. Your dogs, your cats, and your wallet will thank you. Who was the man he shot, his best friend?
Mark Leshikar. He was a Green Beret in the 19th Special Forces Group.
But currently serving when he died, he was...
So the 19th Special Forces Group is actually a National Guard unit. So he was a Green Beret. He was still serving in the National Guard. I don't believe he was on active duty the day he died.
Huh.
I'm not sure if it makes much of a difference, but to be precise.
Was Lavigne ever punished for killing him?
No, he wasn't.
Any way?
Not in any way. He remained an active duty operator on Delta Force after killing a guy in his house when they were both completely out of their minds on drugs. And Lavigne was not even given a toxicology test after he shot somebody.
That's completely crazy.
The reason for that is because once you have done 10 deployments in service of covert operations, assassination operations, it is an unacceptable national security outcome from the perspective of authorities for you to go to prison, for you to be in a courtroom for any reason. Those guys, they are not supposed to exist. And they just can't process them through the criminal justice system in ordinary ways. And to me, that's what made his death so intriguing, because so many people alleged, the sources that I quote, I want to be responsible about this and not say that it's what I believe, but the sort of conventional wisdom that when I first got into the case, people were saying that the military itself had killed Billy Lavigne because he had turned into such a problem and was messing up so badly.
I don't want to derail your story, but you've referred twice to assassination programs. I wasn't aware that the United States admits it assassinates people. When did that start? When did that become a feature of modern war or statecraft or whatever it is? What is that? What are you talking about?
In 2001, President George W. Bush signed secret orders that essentially, and they're secret, so I haven't read them, but based on the best reporting that I've seen, he signed secret orders that essentially reversed the assassination ban that had been put in place decades earlier. Actually, the groundwork for that legal move had been laid under President Reagan. There were memos in place, there were certain authorities, executive orders in place that did allow for assassination in the case when the target was deemed to be a terrorist. Those authorities actually weren't used, to my understanding, for decades. But when after the September 11th attacks, Bush reversed that. And you're saying that you haven't heard too much about it, but that's because we often hear about it by a certain euphemism, which is night raids. So you may have heard, I'm sure you have heard, that under President Obama, the war making, all of the war effort in Afghanistan became about drone strikes and night raids. Well, night raids is just a euphemism for assassinations. Yes, if somebody comes out waving a white flag, well, he'll probably get shot anyway. But under certain circumstances, they will take people prisoner. But for the most part, when they hit a target, every military age man, as they say, on that target dies.
Whether or not he's guilty of a crime or even suspected of a crime.
Well, guilty of a crime, I mean, there's no accountability over this because it all depends upon the determinations of intelligence analysts in the Joint Special Operations Command and in the CIA and what have you, the people that generate targets. Delta Force just hits the targets. They may not necessarily generate them, although they do have substantial intelligence assets that develop targets. But there's no way to check their work and say, who these people really were. But as I talk about extensively in the book and trying to get some clarity around this, the error rate is believed to be very high, at least 50%.
Is this a longstanding feature of American military policy? Have we been assassinating people for centuries? Is this an American thing to do?
Absolutely not. And in fact, before the modern era, before the 21st century, assassination was not considered to be, a valid or a credit-worthy tool of war making. It was considered to be something dirty and down low. I mean, and there also wasn't perceived to be a tactical advantage necessarily in assassinating enemy commanders in the enemy chain of command. There was more of a sense in fighting things out honestly on the battlefield. And that has completely changed. And, I think one big influence on American policy.
So up until 9/11, you're saying, so when you say modern era, you don't mean like the advent of electricity, you mean like 25 years ago.
So I'm not a military historian by any means, but my understanding is that there was extensive assassination operations also in Vietnam. And we call that's known as the Phoenix program, where the CIA was using assassinations to dismantle what was perceived as enemy command and control networks.
Was it pretty effective? We won that war?
Actually, I think that a lot of people in the sort of national security set did, although it elicited a great deal of repugnance in the public, I think that my sense is that it was perceived as an effective way of waging war.
Well, then why didn't we win?
Well, we haven't won any wars since 1945, unless you count the Gulf War.
Right.
So, I don't think we're doing anything right, basically, including assassinations.
Yeah, I mean, that is a stat that kind of hard to argue with, that you almost never hear in and around Washington. Like, when was the last time you won a war?
Baffling.
You spend $1 trillion a year and you can't win a freaking war. You can't beat the Houthis. Maybe it's time for some reform or to rethink what we're doing. It's not working. It's even by their own measurements.
Sure,
right?
I completely agree. And I think a lot of people, including people who are anti-war, and who would prefer to see a more isolationist foreign policy, complacently assume that because we spend ungodly amounts of money on our military, $1 trillion this year on the national defense budget, that whatever else you think of our foreign policy, at least we have the world's most powerful military. That assumption goes largely unexamined. And the reality is we don't. I was just at Trump's military parade in Washington, D.C. A magazine sent me to cover that. And a lot of those troops were from Fort Bragg. And you may have seen on TV what a joke the parade turned out to be, how disorganized, how unimpressive it was. And the technology that was on display, people expected it to be this fascistic spectacle, this authoritarian spectacle like you might see in North Korea or whatever. But I was looking at the troops going by, not even marching in step. The Bradley fighting vehicles, which are 40 years old and perform very poorly, haven't been replaced with anything newer. Same goes for the Abrams tank. It's been in service for more than 40 years. The Black Hawk helicopter, just before the parade, a Black Hawk helicopter had crashed into a passenger plane over the Potomac River, lest we forget, killed 68 people, worst aviation disaster since 2001. I'm looking at all of this and I'm thinking, man, our Army is in sorry shape. And that was the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army, because the Army actually predates the Constitution and predates the creation of our nation. And to me, it is very worrisome to see the state of decline and disrepair in which it's currently languishing. And I think the stuff that's going on in Fort Bragg is highly symptomatic of just that.
It certainly is. So back to assassinations. So assassinations are, it sounds by your description, like a big part of our foreign policy or our war-making efforts.
A central part of it, sure.
And Delta is basically conducting a lot of these, some of these?
Absolutely. Delta Force and then SEAL Team 6, which is Delta's naval counterpart. Also part of the Joint Special Operations Command. And you hear a lot more about them.
Can I ask a dumb question? Why? So if you're fighting a war or you're in some protracted struggle with violence, I don't know if it's a war, but you're like fighting, why wouldn't you capture key players from the other side in order to extract intelligence from them, usable intelligence from them? I thought that's what we used to do.
I don't want to paint them in a cartoonish light. By them, I mean Delta and JSOC.
Well, they're not making these decisions. I mean, these are made, as you said,
sure,
by the command structure.
Often it's direct orders from the White House.
Right.
And with input from certain congressional leaders are involved in these targeting decisions to a degree that I was not aware.
Congressional leaders?
Apparently, I've heard anecdotes about operators sitting on target and waiting for the go-ahead from Congress. I'm not sure what to make of that because all this is so classified, but that's what I've heard. In any event, there's no doubt.
Why would it be classified?
I'm sorry?
Why would it be classified?
Well, that's another big component of the evolution of the American way of making war, waging war for the past 20 years, is the increasing secrecy around all of this, which I think also has had an extremely deleterious effect.
You're not able to complete a sentence without me interrupting you. I'm so sorry.
No, it's great.
No, you're just saying so many things that are evocative and interesting. I'm trying to track them all down. Okay. I will stop interrupting you. So you said, I don't want to paint a clownish picture of the Delta operators, but
they do capture people. They will abduct people. They will take them to like a ship that's in international waters and do God knows what to them to get information. But in most cases, they're just killing the person that they're targeting.
Boy, there's a lot of lying. And some of the worst deception surrounds your health. How come Washington never talks about the poison in your food supply? What about what's in your drugs? You have a right to know what goes into your mouth, and the more you know, the more distressing it is. That's why it's critical to seek out alternatives you can trust. As an alternative to the garbage that you can pick up at any store, we strongly recommend RE Fountain from Peak. It's a clean electrolyte designed for rest. It's got triple biomax magnesium and no sugar, no artificial sweeteners, no artificial flavors. Everything in it is real. And it's good because staying up all night wrecks your ability to function. RE Fountain can help. It's not a sleep aid. It's not a narcotic, a sedative. It's what your body actually needs to recover and thrive. People here rave about it. We wake up feeling sharp and clear. Peak has really made a big difference. So if you care about actual health, then Peak is the way to go. PIQUE. And right now, you can get up to 20% off for life when you start your first month with Peak. Go to peaklife.com/Tucker. That's PIQUE life.com/Tucker. You will feel it the very first morning. It is great. And what kind of people are these? Like villagers in faraway Middle Eastern countries or others?
It all depends on the theater. It depends upon the time. I can tell you what they're doing right now because Trump made an interesting comment in one of his speeches earlier this year where he said something to the effect of, since my inauguration, it had been a few months since he was inaugurated. He said, since my inauguration, we have eliminated 68 terrorists in Iraq, Syria, and Somalia.
This is all going to come home. We're going to have this kind of violence here. You can't commit violence without facing the effects of violence. It's a principle of the universe. Live by the sword, die by the sword. That never changes. And if we're running around assassinating people, we will have Americans assassinated. Fact.
Well, some of that blowback, I fully agree. Some of that blowback can be seen in cases like Billy Lavigne, where he's someone who has, since he was a very young man, has been raised in this system of violence, who comes back and is unable to control it. And, when he perceives small threats, like with his buddy Mark Leshikar at his house, barging in his front door because they're both out of their head on drugs, he just, as a reflexive mechanism, pulls out his gun and shoots the other guy. So I think one of the first signs of it is, and I'm tracking about 24 murders involving Fort Bragg soldiers in the
24?
book since 2020. Yeah, in which it was either the Fort Bragg soldier who was murdered, accused of murder, or convicted of murder.
24.
24. That's my best count. It might be off by 1 or 2 on the margins.
Well, that's wild.
Yeah.
A military base?
Yes.
I would imagine the murder rate at a military base would be 0.
I think it should be. If you're an employee of the government, if you're an active duty soldier, you're
the most disciplined people in the world, right?
You're supposed to be. I don't know if you can say that anymore.
So Billy Lavigne, by the way, was he from a service family? How did he wind up in all this?
No, he wasn't. He was a a middle class guy working class guy from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, who joined the Army when he was 17 years old, before 9/11 happened. And 9/11 took place while he was still in training. And he soon got taken up the pipeline of the 1st Special Forces Group. And then from there, by 2009, he was a relatively young man, 26, I think, at the time that he was selected for Delta Force.
So he was an extraordinary person in that he was clearly suited to the job. Well,
very physically fit, very outdoorsy, very tough. A guy who had the self-confidence that is necessary for this type of work. An adrenaline junkie for sure. A lot of these guys are big-time adrenaline junkies. Jumping out of planes, parachuting is a big part of what they do. So he was like those guys in all these respects. But at its core, Billy Lavigne was somebody who also had a sense of ethics and right and wrong that his time in the service really degraded to a tragic effect.
So he murders his best friend in front of the daughter, gets away with it, no penalty whatsoever. That is absolutely wild. And then some months later, he himself is found dead with another man on a remote training range at Bragg.
Right, about 18 months later.
18 months later. What were they shot to death?
Yes. And it appears that double murder appears to have been the work of people who knew what they were doing. There were no...
well, you've got about 50,000 potential suspects on the scene because it's a military base, right?
Right. And the other guy was, his name was Timothy Dumas. Not to reduce them to their respective races, but to keep it clear, one was a white guy, one was a black guy. Lavigne's a white guy, Dumas is a black guy. He also was not someone who would have been easy to kill. He wasn't an operator. He was a supply officer who was attached to JSOC. He served in the 95th Civil Affairs Brigade and had done many deployments to Afghanistan in service of the JSOC-led task force in Afghanistan. So he's a guy who gets the operators all the stuff that they need in the field, including cash, weapons, ammunition, food, all the basics, gas. And he was he's a whole separate story that we could go into. But to come back to what we were saying about the murder itself, both of them were very, very tough guys who never went anywhere unarmed, who kept their heads on a swivel, and who had been to war repeatedly. So the fact that both of them were cleanly taken out and then dumped in this remote area, and that the scene was free of any kind of, I interviewed several Army CID agents who worked the scene of the murder, and by all accounts, they found no drugs, no guns, no money, and maybe a couple of shell casings. But there weren't even like footprints on the ground.
Were they shot with a rifle?
No. I was never able to obtain ballistic evidence. I believe that Dumas, the black guy, was shot in the head with a small caliber pistol. And I don't know what a type of weapon caused Lavigne's injuries, but he was shot multiple times in the torso and in the leg, maybe 5 times. I'm not quite sure.
Any idea where they were killed?
Dumas was killed on site, it seems. He was killed execution style on site. Lavigne's body had been wrapped up in a sort of tarp or blanket and placed in the back of his own truck. And then someone had driven out there and abandoned the truck in the woods with his body in the back. And so the Army, there's lots of theories of this murder, but the CID theory was that somebody, the third man, because there had to have been a third person there. These guys couldn't have shot each other because there were no guns. So someone left with the guns at a minimum. And so Army CID presumes that Dumas, who was a really bad guy, to be honest, he was a drug trafficker and by some accounts, a hitman. And
a hitman?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
You said he was an Army officer.
He was a warrant officer.
Warrant officer,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Yeah. But I talked to a woman, a police officer, in fact, who Dumas had offered to kill her husband for money. And so CID presumed...
He was active duty?
He was not active duty at the time of his death. He had just been expelled from the military for his criminal behavior. And that is actually a key fact that we can get into, because the fact that he had been kicked out when he was a few months shy of his 19th year in service. So, or a few months shy of his 20th year, in which case he would have been eligible for a lifetime pension. You know, if you serve 20 years in the military, you get a pension. So the fact that he had been kicked out and deprived of his pension really is an operative fact in all of this, because the story, it goes on from here. But what was I saying about the murder itself?
So he was killed. Dumas was killed on site,
right? So the theory, I was trying to recapitulate CID's theory of the case very briefly, which is that they think that Dumas was hired to kill Lavigne and did kill Lavigne with the cooperation of another person or persons. They then put Lavigne's body in the back of the truck, drive him out in the woods with the intention of throwing his body in a lake that's near there. But the truck got stuck in the woods, or it got stuck in the mud because it wasn't on a road; it was on a fire break trail. And at that point, according to CID's theory of the case, the other guy decided to just abandon the situation and decided to kill Dumas in order to get rid of any witnesses.
We thought this through when we started this podcast a year ago, and we decided we're never advertising anything that we or people on our staff don't use, period. We're only partnering with companies that we agree with and endorse, actually, in our personal lives. So we want to announce a new partnership with a survival company we trust most. Last Country Supply is the name of our collaboration. Last Country Supply. I have a big surplus of survival food from that great company. If you get a bucket of food with a 25-year shelf life, 2,000 calories a day, potatoes, rice, bread, drinks, you feel a lot better. Let's say there's an EMP attack or civil disturbance. I mean, you don't know what could happen in the future. You are prepared and you are protecting your family with Last Country Supply products. So head to lastcountrysupply.com to shop for our new collection. Bulk up now. There is no scenario where you will regret being prepared. What's the theory as to why Dumas would have been hired to kill Lavigne?
Why he would have been hired?
Yes.
So there's a lot of competing possibilities. And as I said, I think that's what makes this murder mystery, for me at least as a writer, it was a productive narrative vehicle, because there's lots of things to explore. One is that Mark Leshikar, the Green Beret who he killed, his teammates, by some accounts, wanted revenge. The fact that murder went completely unpunished, as you might imagine, leads to resentment in the community, leads to a lot of whispers. I mean, you can't just kill somebody. Maybe you get off legally, but there's going to be repercussions.
Yeah, a lot of dangerous people around.
Sure, yeah. So that's one.
Okay, so that's a more human, I'm not saying justifiable. I'm not as bothered by Leshikar's buddies getting together and killing the guy who killed him. That seems understandable.
I will say I found no evidence for that. I also learned that Dumas and Lavigne were trafficking cocaine together at a high level. And that,
They were trafficking cocaine?
Mm-hmm, not dealing cocaine, in little baggies to their friends. I'm talking about trafficking kilos of cocaine from Mexico up into the United States and distributing it in a large multi-state area.
And Lavigne is just once again, an active duty.
That's correct.
Member of Delta Force.
That's correct. Yes. So they had enemies in the drug world, dangerous enemies, people that will kill you if you don't pay for your product. And finally, Lavigne, as I said before, was known to be going around telling people that he didn't believe in the mission anymore, that what the United States was doing was wrong, and was in the process of writing a book. and we touched on this in the beginning of our conversation about how much the unit frowns on people writing books. But,
possibly really frowns on it.
Lavigne's ex-wife told me that he was writing a book. She showed me the text messages where he texted her and said, I'm writing a book. And he also said that someone already wanted to turn it into a movie. Now, Dumas so put a pin in that. Dumas, because he had been kicked out of the army just shy of his pension eligibility date, he also was writing something. It variously described to me as a book or a letter, in which it wasn't a memoir. It was actually deliberately intended as a blackmail document. He told people that he knew about a drug trafficking ring in the special forces involving special forces soldiers who had gone over to the dark side in Afghanistan, where there was a great deal of drug trafficking going on, by the way.
By active duty U.S. military?
By the Afghan client state that the U.S. supported for 20 years.
Of course,
yeah. So all these guys, having served many times in Afghanistan, would have been very close and in close proximity to working with warlords, police chiefs, militia commanders, and so on, Afghans, who were some of the biggest drug traffickers in the world, period. So that context, I think, is important. But in any event, Dumas had written this letter purporting to name all these individual members of this drug trafficking ring and the special forces, and was going around telling people that because of this leverage that he had over the Special Forces Command, he was going to get them to reinstate his pension. So the fact that both of these guys are writing tell-all documents and then both turn up murdered on Fort Bragg is yet another potential theory for explaining their deaths.
You must have spoken to people they knew, their friends.
Mm-hmm.
What is the prevailing theory among people who were there?
I can't say that anybody purports to know for sure, but I would say the most common reflexive answer that you get from folks is that they think that they were murdered by elements of Delta Force, either rogue elements of the unit or the command itself. Now, I want to be very careful.
Come on.
I want to be very careful and say that I don't have any evidence of that, and I don't pretend to.
Is that the opinion of any Delta operators, do you know?
Funnily enough, yeah. One of the guys I talked to, a former Delta operator, seemed to find that, a former Delta officer, seemed to find that perfectly plausible, which was disturbing to me. But
it's bonkers.
Again, it's not. Folks who read the book, they will see the direction in which I lean ultimately. I don't want to spoil, the ending. But
bottom line, no arrests have been made.
That's not true. And a further complication comes in with regard to just that. So recently, I don't want to spoil the last chapter of the book, but recently the Department of Justice accused someone of committing these murders. And let me just say that it is not at all who you would think. And virtually all, or I can just say all of the sources that I talked to about this, either dismiss it out of hand and say there's no way, or they just have a really hard time believing it. And the person they've accused has pleaded not guilty, and he is scheduled to go on trial in January 2026.
Have you spoken to him?
I have not spoken to his father, but not him.
Is he a Delta operator?
He's not. Yeah. He's someone who people struggle to understand how anyone could imagine that this person would travel from where he lived, which was not in the area, go onto Fort Bragg and murder these two guys who are, one of them is like a real life Jason Bourne. And the other one, also a very dangerous man. How he could have done that and gotten away with it. And also the indictment is very strange. The victims are identified only by their initials. A lot of the cases under seal. The whole thing is very suspicious. I don't want to dance around it. A lot of people that I've talked to say the government is framing this kid because he was 20 years old at the time, 20. And Lavigne's 37, Dumas is 44. These are mature men who the idea that a 20-year-old stick-up kid could have killed them defies credulity in a lot of people's opinion. Now, Personally, I have to think that the Department of Justice doesn't indict people for murder lightly.
I hope not.
I just I have trouble getting that far mentally. So it seems like he must have had some involvement. I want to credit my government for being at least that minimum level of responsibility, that they're not simply framing this kid. But they haven't made any of their evidence public. And as I said, he's pleaded not guilty. So we'll just have to see how that trial goes.
But they made the indictment public, but none of the evidence.
The indictment is public, but like I said, I only knew about it because I think someone sent it to me. It only identifies the victims by their initials, WL and TD. I've never seen that before. A murder indictment where the victims are identified by their initials.
Especially since their murder was public. I mean, it was reported on at the time, right?
It is a very, very strange case.
Here's what we know. We know that Lavigne murdered a guy, got away with it. Obviously, his superior officers knew that. Command knew that. Was it widely known that he was a drug trafficker?
It was widely known that he was a drug user. And yes, it was known that he was the guy that dealt drugs to his fellow operators. I mean, I talked to Mark Leshikar's family. So Mark and Billy, they were best friends. And so Mark's wife and his mom even, they all knew Billy Lavigne. They had all spent time at his house. And they and many other witnesses, I interviewed lots of family members and friends of both of these men. They said that, you would go into Billy's house and there was just cocaine everywhere. And all his fellow operators from Delta Force were at his house too. And there's a bunch of coke on the table. They're doing MDMA. They're even smoking heroin, and it's considered to be totally normal in this community. That's what to me was the most shocking to hear again and again. Like, not only to be told that all these guys are using drugs, but that people just seem to think that that's kind of what they do. Which I didn't know that.
There's so many threats. I mean, the most obvious is the human effect of 12 combat deployments. So that's too much, obviously, and that will destroy you. It sounds like it destroyed Billy Lavigne. The second is, like, where's the Pentagon in this? This is the premier unit in the United States military. Mm-hmm. And people are openly using cocaine and smoking crack and shooting their friends and no one's doing anything about it. Like, what is that?
It's baffling to me. I would have never imagined. I mean, I remember when I was in the Army, one guy, a sergeant in my company, tested positive for cocaine in a piss test. And he was just gone after that. I mean, he was just removed from the unit.
Well, that's a question that I should have asked you a half an hour ago. What about drug testing?
So all members of the military are subject to random drug testing, but apparently they consider it a joke. I mean, there's a lot of reporting on this around the Navy SEALs. A lot of Navy SEALs have gone on the record to say that, they were using constantly during their time in service, and that the drug testing regimen was a complete joke because there's ways to defeat it. In particular, you can get a tip-off because it's supposed to be random. It's not something they do regularly. And maybe that's what they need to be doing. But as the randomized testing, you can be told by someone in time, hey, your name is on the list. And that gives you time to suck down a bunch of water and stop doing drugs and pass the test.
Or buy clean urine.
But you would imagine maybe that's something that's going on as well. Hadn't heard that in particular, but I know that people can do that.
They certainly can. You
got to remember, these guys are intelligent, highly trained. They're spies just as much as they are assassins. Many of them are. There's various levels within Delta Force. There's compartmented elements. There's the line squadrons, et cetera. So it depends on the person. But, these are people who their job is to do covert action. So they're very good at getting away with things. When your job is to penetrate a foreign country that's guarded by paranoid counterintelligence officials, to go into that country and, bug an embassy or kidnap a guy off the street, a drug test isn't going to be something that you're too worried about, I think.
And you alluded to this earlier. There comes a point where, the government is afraid of you because you know too much, you've done too much. You're also performing what they think is a valuable service. No one else can provide that service. Like, you're too valuable to expel over a failed piss test.
That's a great point. That's absolutely part of it. Which is that, after they've spent millions of dollars training you, they don't really care. I think they would put it as like, if they were to come out and say it, it's like big boy rules, I think is how they look at it. If you're going to do drugs, then do it. Just don't get caught.
Right.
Just don't get caught is the rule.
Well, it sounds like their work life has the same rule.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you said Billy Lavigne had decided that the missions he'd been sent on 12 times were not morally justifiable. The whole war on terror was a bad idea. Is that a common view, do you think?
You know, it is a fact that combat veterans are one of the most reliable anti-war demographics in our country.
I've noticed.
Yeah.
They don't know that in cable news. They're always like, oh, combat veterans support whatever mission this is. That's the opposite of what I've noticed.
The opposite is true. And there's data on this. There's polling. Super majorities of combat veterans say that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were not worth
I've noticed
fighting, and I'm one of them. And so, to me, to learn that Billy Lavigne, held those views is not surprising at all.
When did that come to you, by the way? Take 5 minutes and tell us your story, if that's all right.
Sure. My story is really not part of the book, but the relevant background would be that I actually deployed to Iraq at the same time as Lavigne's first tour in Iraq. And, before that deployment was over, I had come to the firm point of view that the war was not just a mistake, but a crime to carry out this invasion on the grounds that there were supposedly weapons of mass destruction in Iraq when there weren't.
And what was your role? You were in the Army.
Yeah, I was in college. I was a college student who joined the Army Reserves. I was a student at the University of Texas. In order to pay for college,
oh wow,
I fell for the recruiter's pitch, which is 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year. I was 19 years old, and
what year was that?
That was in 2004. 2003, excuse me.
That used to be real. Well, that was the year we invaded Iraq.
Right, yeah.
That used to be real. I mean, the reserves served, 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year for a long, long time. And then the war on terror commenced, and those guys were dragged into real war. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that had happened before. Had it? Well, you would know. You did it.
No, it hadn't happened before. And in fact, I sometimes in retrospect struggle to explain to folks how it could have been that I opposed the Iraq War and had no interest in fighting in the Iraq War, and yet still joined the Army Reserve at a time when it was clear that the Iraq War was going to happen.
Well, because the reserves were not used in that way.
There's that, and also even people who opposed the war had no idea that it was going to last for years. We forget about this completely, but even people who opposed the war assumed that it would be over pretty quickly. And I can remember even asking my recruiter naively, "Are you sure I'm not going to get sent to this war in Iraq that everyone's talking about?" Don't worry about that. But of course, my deployment orders were cut even before I left basic training. They were sent to me while I was standing in formation in basic training. It said to deploy to Iraq for 528 days.
Oh, come on. And you're a UT student?
Yeah.
Sorry to laugh.
It's okay.
It's hilarious. Oh.
It was 2 years before I went back to college, after the day I signed that contract.
What did your girlfriend or parents or buddies say? I'm sorry to laugh. It's like, do you see the humor kind of? The dark
I do,
humor?
Of course, yeah. My parents were pretty resigned to it. Bless their hearts. They had to put up with a lot. But, before I even deployed back to the United States, I was writing editorials for the Daily Texan, because I wrote for my student newspaper. Talking about the Iraq War and using my perspective as a veteran to try to convince people that this was a mistake and that this whole post 9/11 permanent war paradigm should be reexamined. So that's kind of like my sort of origin story and how I came to.
Wait, so how long did you spend in Iraq?
528 days.
Oh, you actually did?
Oh, yeah. Every single one of those days.
What was that like?
I think a lot of people certainly had rougher deployments than I did. I've read books about some of the units that had the most casualties. I don't want to, exaggerate what my experience was like, but at the same time, it was pretty rough. It was pretty rough. I mean, there were guys in my unit who were killed. We were attacked on a fairly regular basis. nothing crazy, but, getting shot at and getting mortared was a continuous thing. We were often outside the wire because although we were non-combat troops, we built bridges and roads was our job. We did a lot of construction work and dirt work in war zones or in, areas where there had been fighting, especially to repair roads that had been damaged by IEDs. So several of our convoys were ambushed. I think maybe 5 or 6 guys were shot and survived. And then also there were other bad things that went on. In one circumstance, there was a soldier who shot up a car in front of me and another group of soldiers and killed the occupants of that car, who were just a woman and her kid.
Ugh.
And, he said that he thought that, they were approaching too fast. I don't want to get into all the details of it, but the ugliness of it and the savagery and how unnecessary it all was made a deep, deep impression on me at that age. And I have dedicated all of my work as a journalist and reporter ever since then to opposing, the continuation of these wars.
Well, bless you for that. What was it like coming back after 528 days? Did you rejoin your fraternity or what? I mean, it must have been bewildering.
It was great coming back. It was good. I didn't have like the sort of stereotypical Hurt Locker type of experience where, I wasn't like, what's that movie, Apocalypse Now, where I'm laying under the ceiling fan skinning rats. It wasn't like that. I mean, I do remember having, it's been a long time now, but I do remember having nightmares for years. Not necessarily of violence, but I would have this dream where I had lost my weapon and was unarmed. I was in Iraq on the street or whatever and didn't have a weapon. So there was some lingering effects, but I don't complain about my personal experience in this. The U.S. killed 1 million people in Iraq, maybe the estimates vary, but hundreds of thousands, possibly 1 million people. They're the ones who are the victims of this, not U.S. soldiers like me who have hurt feelings when we come back. I want to be clear about that.
But it sounds like your experience there affected your view of the broader mission. For sure.
Yes, profoundly, I would say.
What about the guys you served with?
My reaction was typical, like I was saying before. There was a divide in the unit. I can remember debating the 2004 election with the guys who were for Kerry and the guys who were for Bush. The military is very reflective of our society. Maybe not the special forces, but the regular army is. And so the same divisions we see in society at large are reflected in the ranks. So it was no different.
What do you think the prevailing view, let me ask you again, among the special operators is of the mission itself? Like, why are we doing this? Is that a question they discuss?
I don't hear them talk about that sort of thing very much.
Yeah.
They just say, bad guys. We kill bad guys. We kill terrorists. I have to assume that in units like Delta Force, the majority of the guys are able to compartmentalize the ethics of it and or the wisdom of it and say that that's simply not their job to think about and that they just follow orders.
Yeah.
But as you can see in the case of a guy like Billy Lavigne, that only lasts for so long. Eventually, it starts to dawn on you that this is not okay. And if you listen to operator type podcasts, you'll hear a lot of that. I mean, they're not the most jingoistic and pro-war people, like you said before, are cable news anchors, not, soldiers. The soldiers, I think, have a more nuanced perspective, almost as a rule.
Did you ever run into any cable news anchors when you were over there?
No.
So Mark Levin was not in your unit?
I didn't see him, no. I did see Joe Millionaire once.
Joe Millionaire? Whatever happened to him?
I don't know. I saw him in Iraq. I also saw 50 Cent gave a concert in Iraq.
How was it?
It was cool. Yeah. It was a high point of the deployment.
So this is the coolest Christmas present I'll get this year. This is a leather Alp pouch. Logo right there, gets on your belt, made in the United States out of actual leather. If you carry, you can put the firearm on one side and a loaded tin of Alp on the other. It will never be far from you, and it is legit cool. I want to go back to the connection between Lavigne and his friends, his colleagues, the Delta operators, but also the other special forces community members at Fort Bragg, and drug use and drug trafficking. That's shocking, but it doesn't seem to have shocked their superiors. To what extent is drug trafficking tolerated in the military? I can't believe I've been asking this question, but it sounds like it is.
It's hard to imagine that you would have to ask that question. And yet, from what I was able to learn, it's not an isolated case. Lavigne and Dumas. In fact, it seems that after 2020, these like the drug trafficking rings that permeate Fort Bragg only increased, and you even had public statements from Fort Bragg officials acknowledging, for example, that they had a 100% increase in drug crime on base from 2020 to 2021.
How could you have drug crime on a military base?
It was very surprising to me as well, but you even have cases of military police officers dealing drugs out of their police cars on Fort Bragg. Folks want to look that up. Look up the case of Jacob Dickerson, who was an MP on Fort Bragg who was busted for drug trafficking. And in fact, I obtained the investigative files in that case and learned that there was actually 4 or 5 of these MPs on base that were trafficking drugs. And they dropped charges against all but one of the guys because he had exacerbated the trouble he was in by getting into a drunk driving accident. And even he was just given a slap on the wrist. I think he got, a month or 2 in the stockade and a dishonorable discharge. But there is I would say, pervasive practice of, or there's drug availability on Fort Bragg that's comparable to any, dense urban city in the United States.
The military is an authoritarian structure. I don't need to tell you that since you served in it. So it seems like you could prevent that if you really wanted to. You could fix that problem.
You would think so. And I'm at a loss to explain why so little has been done. I've talked to people who, CID sources who told me.
CID is what?
The Army's Criminal Investigations Division.
Yes.
It's a quasi-military, quasi-civilian police agency that has jurisdiction to investigate crimes involving American soldiers. So you have MPs, who are the uniformed officers, and then above them you have CID. So they're the ones who investigate, major crimes on bases. And they told me about closed-door meetings in which the Fort Bragg brass mostly seemed concerned with, massaging the statistics that they kept just to make it seem like drug crime was under control when in fact it's not.
Who runs Fort Bragg?
Well, Fort Bragg is under the largest umbrella formation there would be the 18th Airborne Corps. So the commander of the 18th Airborne Corps is going to be the highest ranking Army officer on Fort Bragg. But you also have the Joint Special Operations Command there, which is a very elite formation in the military, the most elite. And so the commander of JSOC is also a very important and powerful person who's a 3-star general, if I'm not mistaken, who's on the base as well. So you have a collection of what people call the brass. And then, of course, they're subservient to the Pentagon and the Secretary of the Army and the Secretary of Defense.
One connection that I've almost never heard anybody make, but I've thought about, so the war in Vietnam really starts in 1964 with the Gulf of Tonkin incident and extends all the way really to the final end in April of 1975. That coincided almost exactly with the rise of a real drug epidemic in the United States. Vietnam is a poppy growing region, the Golden Triangle. And for a bunch of different reasons, that war seemed to have had a material effect on drug use in the United States. And a lot of people died from drugs during the period of the Vietnam War. And I think there must be a connection. You see the exact same phenomenon around the war in Afghanistan. Starts in 2001, ends 3 years ago, and it coincides precisely with this explosion in opioid drug use and the inevitable death toll from that. Is there a direct connection between those two things?
Yes, there is. And the U.S. media's failure to connect those things is probably the biggest dereliction of duty on part of the press corps that I've seen in my life.
Those are big things.
Big things, yeah.
The death toll from drugs during the Vietnam period and particularly during the Afghanistan period dwarfs the death toll in the war itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The number one cause of death for Americans age 18 to 45 is fentanyl overdose. And where does that comes directly out of the heroin crisis that afflicted this country from, let's say, the mid 2000s up until 2015, 16, 17, 18. And so it's very important to ask, what were the causes of the heroin crisis? And
I don't think I've ever heard anyone ask that question.
Well, the conventional explanation, which is not wrong, is that the roots of it lie in the overprescription of opioid painkillers in the 1990s.
Yes.
That's very true. That happened.
The Sackler family, Purdue Pharma.
Yeah. That created widespread dependence on opiates among a number of people. You also saw at the same time, to feed this demand, increased heroin production in Mexico. However, more than 90% of all the world's heroin was produced in Afghanistan between 2001 and 2021.
More than 90%?
In fact, Afghanistan under U.S. occupation produced more heroin than the whole world could absorb. So supply there outstripped global demand. And so for that reason, there are now believed to be large stockpiles of Afghan heroin in places like Pakistan and Tajikistan.
Do you think heroin production went up under U.S. occupation?
I mean, it went up exponentially. So, and as a direct result of the U.S. invasion, and we should talk about the Taliban in this context, because I'll try to keep it brief to the essentials, because it actually goes back to the 1980s. So in the 1980s, the CIA armed and funded Afghan resistance fighters known as Mujahideen to fight the Russians who had invaded Afghanistan and were occupying Afghanistan to prop up a communist government there. So, and they won that war. That's what we call Charlie Wilson's War, the movie, of course. But after the CIA withdrew, those warlords that they had previously set up took over Afghanistan and ruled it in the 1990s. And they were all major drug traffickers. They're the ones who were responsible for turning Afghanistan into the narco state that it became. Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, was the main recipient of CIA cash. And he turned into by far the biggest drug lord in Afghanistan. There's also the clan of Nasim Akhundzada in the Helmand province, who was another major recipient of CIA aid, and who turned the Helmand into the world's most prolific opium, poppy, heroin, morphine producing area in the world. The Taliban, we hear so much about the Taliban's oppression of women and making music illegal, and they do those things. The Taliban is an arch conservative movement whose ethics and morality I absolutely do not share. However,
I never understood why I was supposed to give a shit about that. I mean, I want everyone to be free just as a matter of principle, but but moving, metric tons of heroin into my country, that seems like a real story. Whether people can, girls can get PhDs in feminist studies or whatever is of less concern to me, right?
Right. Well, the Afghan people didn't like it either, all the drug trafficking that was going on in their country. And what made the Taliban popular originally was their suppression of the drug industry in Afghanistan. They took over and eliminated all of the drug production that was taking place there, because you can see how it's ideologically consistent with their Sharia law. Mm-hmm. They don't tolerate drugs. They don't tolerate alcohol either. So they get rid of all of it.
Sharia law is bad, Seth. I don't know if you've heard that. It's bad. It's worse than what's happening in New York and Detroit. It's just bad. I don't know why. It's just like years of brainwashing. I'm not Muslim. I'm not for Sharia law. On the other hand, compared to what? Compared to Baltimore? Shut up. Sharia law.
Well,
sorry, Sharia law.
In Afghanistan, the effect of implementing Sharia law was the total suppression of the heroin industry and the decimation of the world's supply of heroin.
And a massive reduction in the rape of boys. They didn't like that.
That's another subject that's absolutely part of this. And I almost hesitate to go there because it is a everything I'm saying about drugs could also be talked about. I can't believe I'm even saying this, but child sex trafficking was something that took place. That was something that the U.S.-backed client state was deeply implicated in child sex trafficking. Another thing that's falsely laid at the feet of the Taliban and said, this is just part of Afghan culture, when that is not true. But to return to the heroin thing, it was actually in the summer of 2001.
Do you feel like your mind explodes with like when you start to understand what the truth is? Just the layers of propaganda that attach like barnacles to your brain when they come off. You're like, I don't even recognize this world. Do you feel that ever?
In this case, yes, because although I had served in the military and worked as a war reporter, I'd actually never been to Afghanistan. So I had to educate myself on the Afghan war, starting from scratch. And what I learned was that the Taliban eliminated the drug industry just months before the U.S. invaded. The DEA and the UN certified the eradication campaign that the Taliban had carried out. And when the U.S. invaded in 2001, they teamed up with the exact same narco warlords that had previously ruled Afghanistan, what we call the Northern Alliance. And those people took over, and Hamid Karzai was installed as CIA puppet president of Afghanistan and immediately legalized poppy production in Afghanistan. And within the span of, let's say, 2 years, maybe 3 years, heroin production increased something like 7,000 or 8,000% in Afghanistan. And
of course, a lot of it winds up in Europe and the United States, correct?
Yes. You have, like I said, more heroin than the world can even absorb.
Why would the U.S. authorities, why would the CIA, why would the White House allow that?
My view, there's a paranoid point of view, conspiratorial point of view among people who believe that this is some kind of societal program, there's some nefarious program that the U.S. government wants the whole world to be inundated with heroin. I personally am more inclined to the view that they just don't care, and that these type of mercenary drug traffickers make natural allies to a foreign power that's invading your country.
Is there a difference between negligence and malice? If I leave my toddler in the car with the windows closed on a hot day to go gamble at a casino and he suffocates, does it matter if I wanted to kill him or if I just didn't care enough?
No, I don't think it matters.
It doesn't matter.
And I'm not making an excuse for
No, I know you're not. I'm just like... the bottom line is that U.S. authorities, the Bush administration, and then the Obama administration, and then, up until the end, up until the Biden administration, allowed the United States and its citizens to die of drug ODs because the country that they were running, Afghanistan, was producing all the heroin. Right? I mean,
yes. The amount of heroin that was being produced was very potent, high quality, and large amounts of it. So that obviously supply and demand depressed prices. And you have ample reporting. It's not just Europe and Australia and Asia that's being flooded by heroin. Also, the United States in this time saw a massive increase in supply. Now, here's where the cover-up comes in. Because all of this was well reported up until the late 2000s, let's say 2007 or so. That's when the DEA started putting out statements to the effect that although there was rising heroin supplies in the United States, they claimed that none of it was coming from Afghanistan. Less than 1% is the official figure. And so in the process of writing this book, I spent a lot of time in the weeds trying to figure out how exactly the DEA made this determination, because it's kind of like saying no oil from Saudi Arabia ever gets burned in the United States. You ask, how is that possible that the world's largest consumer of drugs is not importing any drugs from the world's largest producer of drugs?
Which, by the way, it controls.
Which it controls, yeah. That seems to defy reason, yeah.
Yes, it does. That's why you're a good reporter, Seth.
If you read the book, you will see that I get deep in the nitty-gritty of it, down to the actual mathematics of it. But suffice it to say, I find that that statistic was totally bogus and invented as a way to cover up the fact this incredibly damaging effect of the war in Afghanistan had on U.S. society.
So I guess another way to say that would be, in fact, a lot of heroin from our client state, Afghanistan, was winding up in American cities.
Absolutely. especially the China, what's called China white heroin. It's called China because of its color, not because it actually comes from China. Now, the picture is slightly confounded because there was also a lot of Mexican heroin coming to the United States during the same time. But Mexican heroin is black in color and low in quality. It's called black tar heroin.
Yeah. It's usually smoked.
Right. And it was the China white that really flooded the US during this time period and caused the most damage, especially in the Northeast and in Appalachia and in the Midwest, because that's where flights from Afghanistan come. It's all trafficked through airports on the eastern seaboard, whereas Mexico kind of supplies the west of the United States and the south.
Right. That's why Jerry Garcia was a black tar addict in Marin County, California, and all the junkies in Philadelphia are using China white.
Right. And the China white, because it's so much more potent, is what leads to all of the huge overdose crisis that we suffered during these years.
Pretty hard to OD from smoking heroin. Possible, but hard.
That's my understanding, yeah.
So who profited from that?
That's a very good question. Not the people of Afghanistan. The numbers that I've seen suggest that maybe $1 billion a year was the profits that went to Afghans of one type or another. The majority of it went to drug supply chains outside of Afghanistan, and that's the most opaque aspect of all of this. And that's where I have the most unanswered questions. Who exactly was making all of this money?
So the occupation of Afghanistan was a military occupation, diplomatic as well, intel components. But basically, we had our troops in Afghanistan, therefore we controlled Afghanistan. So if there's an exponential rise, by thousands of percent rise in opium production, heroin manufacturing, and export of heroin, it's kind of hard to believe the U.S. military didn't know that.
Oh, they certainly knew about it. And there's an agency called the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction that had, although it's a U.S. government agency, has done the most important retrospective work on this, including lots of interviews with key people who and all of them acknowledged that they knew that it was going on. And SIGAR is an agency, its acronym, discuss how the U.S. military didn't want anything to do with drug eradication because they saw it as detrimental to their mission because the people they were working with were drug traffickers. And the same story goes for the CIA, except SIGAR explicitly says in its 2018 report on counter-narcotics that the CIA, rather than cooperating with anti-drug eradication measures, prioritized its relationship with significant drug traffickers. That's the language of the U.S. government report. And it even names some of the major drug traffickers who worked with the CIA, who were on the CIA's payroll. And let's not forget that the president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, and his brother, Ahmed Wali Karzai, were on the payroll of the CIA and led this drug trafficking organization, which, recently our government accused Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela of being the head of a drug cartel on some very, very flimsy evidence. And they make these organization charts where they purport to show Maduro at the top and these other guys. If you had taken that same lens and trained it on Afghanistan, you could have very easily created an organization structure showing the world's biggest drug cartel with Hamid Karzai at the very top. And he's someone who, is sitting down to dine with President Obama and all these other top U.S. officials.
But if I'm a special operator in Afghanistan and I'm working with the local leaders who are also drug traffickers, I mean, it's not a huge step, and I'm buying heroin for, $1,000 a pound when I can resell it for many, many times that. It's going to be kind of tempting to bring some home, right?
Timothy Dumas, who was found dead next to Billy Lavigne on Fort Bragg in 2020, had evidently written a letter in which he outlined exactly what you're talking about, a drug trafficking organization involving special forces soldiers who were trafficking heroin from Afghanistan to the United States on military planes. And he was killed before that letter was ever made public.
Who did he write it to?
He wrote it. It was addressed to a top-ranking. I never read the letter, but I interviewed someone who did read the letter. I interviewed 3 people who knew about the letter, including Dumas's son, and also his partner in crime, a very corrupt former North Carolina state trooper named Freddie Wayne Huff, who was entrusted with a copy of the letter. and read it. And he said that it was addressed to a high-ranking general. As I said before, Dumas intended to use this blackmail letter to exert pressure on the special forces in order to get his pension reinstated. But it doesn't seem to have been a very wise maneuver on his part.
No. You can push too hard, then you wind up executed. I'm coming around to your theory, by the way, that this may have been retaliatory.
That's not my theory, although I get what you're saying. But just to be super clear about it, because these are not light allegations. So I just want to be as responsible as possible as a reporter
good for you.
And say that this is what people have alleged, this is what the evidence is, but we don't know for sure. And the reason we don't know is because our ignorance has been procured by the people, by the authorities who have the responsibility to investigate this stuff and are not doing it.
Do you think, nicely put, and thank you for saying that, do you think the U.S., people in the U.S. military, in the Special Forces community, did participate in drug trafficking?
I find it hard to imagine that they weren't. I will say that there's other ways of making money, other types of crime that I discuss in the book. The book's not entirely about drug trafficking. There's also a lot of weapons trafficking, a lot of weapons theft from the military. As Fort Bragg, it would blow your mind if they ever disclosed how much, how many weapons and how much in explosives that they lose annually. It's really crazy.
What kind of weapons? What kind of explosives?
Military weapons and plastic explosives. They lose an incredible amount of weapons every year. And Timothy Dumas was a guy who was trafficking weapons. Besides trafficking drugs,
he was a quartermaster.
He was a quartermaster, and so he was deeply involved in all of this.
Yeah.
I mean, I read his separation packet. It's 128 pages, and it makes crystal clear that his entire career was characterized by stuff going missing, documents going missing. When he was in Afghanistan attached to JSOC, all of the records for 2 years, 2012 and 2013, if I'm not mistaken, went missing in their entirety. All the paperwork on all of the JSOC supply chain for that battalion was just gone. But
so what do you do with military grade weapons, even small arms, fully automatic rifles? Like, what do you do with something? You can't sell it in the United States.
No, you sell it to Mexican cartels. And then that's how they end up better armed than the Mexican government in states like Tamaulipas and Nuevo León and Coahuila.
Yeah.
Los Zetas.
The Ukrainian military has been selling NATO weapons, American supplied weapons to the Mexican drug cartels. Fact. They hate it when you say that, but it's true.
Well, I haven't seen that reporting, but I will tell you this about Ukraine. That agency I mentioned earlier, Skygar, there are provisions in the laws providing aid to Ukraine that ensure that that type of accountability never takes place again. Because Skygar turned into a real embarrassment for the war in Afghanistan because apparently they took their job seriously and did it correctly. So the aid to Ukraine can never be audited. That's written in the law.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, this can't continue for too long. It's too out of control.
The Roman Empire declined for hundreds of years before it finally disintegrated.
Well, and then it just moved east. And it lasted another 1,000 years. But amazingly, so of course you're right. You're absolutely right. But it is bewildering that this was, even just 20 years ago, if you had done a poll of people I knew anyway, I lived in D.C., I was around the government every day. Is this country corrupt? I would say, not really. I mean, that was my view. I think most people felt that way. When you joined the Army, did you think the people who ran the Army were corrupt?
No. The simple answer is no. But, corruption takes many forms. In the United States, if you get pulled over by a cop, you can't just bribe that cop to let you go. That's not going to happen. But the higher you go up in the power structures in this country, the more you find legal corruption. I mean, is it corruption for a corporation to give unlimited amounts of money to a politician to get elected? Because that's our Supreme Court says that's totally legal under Citizens United. But in another context, in another country, in another time, that would just be considered the rankest sort of bribery. So it depends upon how you define corruption.
Well, of course, it is bribery.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, obviously.
Yeah.
It's a complex question because, do you have a right to tell people to what extent they can support a politician. I don't know. I mean, I think it is complicated, but the effect as it stands right now is politicians are bribed by donors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Period.
absolutely.
I mean, that's how we got Ted Cruz. Totally corrupt human being.
Yeah, unfortunately, he's my senator. I hope that he has a primary challenger soon.
Yeah, well, I think he just won. So probably not for a while. But anyway, sorry, not to get off on a Ted Cruz tangent, but I just want to say again, Ted Cruz is corrupt. His wife works for Goldman in Texas. And when she pitches clients, I happen to know for a dead certain fact, he goes to dinner with them. So that's corruption. He's corrupt.
Well, I'm sure he's looking forward to coming back on your show again after the last time.
Anyway, sorry. Now I'm being mean, but it's true. And there's a lot of it. But when it happens in the Senate, you're like, okay, of course Ted Cruz is corrupt. Look at him. But when it happens among people most civilians revere, like, the most elite units in the U.S. military, that's dispiriting, among other things, right?
I think it is. And I think my inclination is to think that it is a result of waging wars that nobody really believes in for years and years, because think about what that does to your psychology. When you're engaged in a righteous cause that has widespread societal buy-in, you're going to be constrained by your own sense of yourself as a virtuous actor. And you're going to know that when you're tempted to do things for money or for other motives, that's not consistent with your self-image. And so you don't do it. But when you're fighting for years in wars like Afghanistan that the public just doesn't even pay attention to, and all your allies are drug traffickers and they're raping little boys and that they're trafficking sex slaves, but you're just doing it because you like your work and you like being an elite soldier, then it's easier to take a mercenary attitude towards this and just think it's not going to matter if I skim, $100,000 off the top of the op fund that we have out here in the field, all this cash that we're given, or it's no big deal for me to grab a couple of bricks of this heroin and put it in my Foot Locker and then sell it for $50,000 when I get back to Fayetteville.
I hope what you just said is clipped, because that's a perfect summation of what my instincts are, that the more morally corrupt the enterprise is, the more morally corrupt the people participating in the enterprise become.
And that's why I spend so much time in the book talking about the wars in which all of this, the context in which this takes place, because it doesn't take place in a vacuum. And, the decisions of our leaders in this country trickle down to the lowest levels and have an influence on how people live their lives.
That's right. Mm. Has anyone ever been held accountable? I mean, I think you've confirmed my instinct, which is that there was a connection between the war in this drug-producing country and our occupation of this drug-producing country and the drug epidemic in the United States. I mean, there's clearly, you have to be an idiot not to see the connection. Mm. But has anyone ever been indicted, arrested, convicted for participating in that?
No, nobody.
Nobody?
Nobody, no. For the drug trafficking that took place in Afghanistan?
Yeah.
No, that's never happened. And there was total impunity around the entire enterprise.
Man, I think the United States government, I know, is doing things right now whose consequences cannot be foreseen, but they'll be profound.
I agree.
And I think the more rotten your behavior, the bigger the consequences. And you don't get away with it. Mm-hmm. No one gets away with it.
I agree. And, you wonder what's going on now, because Afghanistan is fading rapidly into the past. The war ended in 2021. And, is there massive drug trafficking taking place under the auspices of U.S. military control right now? Not that I know of, but there's other things. Ukraine was the most corrupt country in Europe before the war there, before Russia invaded. And we've dumped so much money and so much equipment into that country with no oversight at all, and transferred it to a political class that we know is corrupt to the bone. So that would be the place to look now, in my opinion, for the contemporary examples of corruption.
You'd get assassinated if you tried to do that. You'd be assassinated by the Ukrainians, perhaps, with the help of U.S. intel agencies. Period.
I feel like it would be very unsafe to look into that subject.
It would be very unsafe.
Yeah.
I can tell you firsthand, it'd be very unsafe to do that. In fact, you couldn't do it.
Whereas,
which is pretty crazy if you think about it.
It is crazy. There's a lot of things that are crazy these days. I think that what made it possible to write what I wrote about Afghanistan was something that happened while I was writing the book, not too long ago, in fact, which was that, the Taliban took over after the U.S. withdrew in 21 and then proceeded to do exactly what they had done in the year 2000 and 2001, which was to completely eradicate all drugs from the country. And up until then, we had been told, to the extent that drug production in Afghanistan came up, we were always told that it was the Taliban and that the insurgency and the drug production were just two sides of the same coin.
Liars, yes.
But the best lies are the ones that are 180-degree opposite of the truth.
Exactly.
And what made it, what gave me the, gave me the confidence to really, to hit as hard as I could in this narrative was seeing the Taliban in 2023. They completed another eradication campaign where they once again totally eliminated heroin production and drug production from Afghanistan. So at that point, I had doubts as a reporter because I'm not omniscient and, there's always this conflicting information. So I kind of doubt my own conclusions. I'm thinking, well, they must have been involved to some degree. We hear that said so often from the most prestigious institutions of media and government. There must be some truth to it. But seeing the Taliban totally eliminate drugs from their country again made me realize, okay, this was always a one-sided thing. It wasn't that both sides were involved in it. And like I said, that didn't happen until 2023. And that's what I think makes it possible to tell the true story of Afghanistan for the first time.
You want to get really red-pilled? You want to make it almost hard to live here? Look up Taliban drug treatment. You're in your early 40s, I think. So you've lived in this country a long time, and you must know people who've been ensnared in drugs or died from drugs. I know, and you live here. So you know people who become addicted to drugs and can't get off. And I know a lot of them, and most are dead. Ask yourself, super simple question. Is the Taliban drug treatment program, you can look this up, there are videos of it online.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Does it produce a higher or lower relapse rate than the American version in, say, Delray Beach, Florida? Are the Taliban better at getting people off opioids than we are? And the answer is not just yes, but hell yes. Way better. Because they don't wean them off with methadone. This whole thing is a freaking lie. By the way, a lot of people get rich off that. You know who you are if you're listening. Some of them are big political donors who get rich on drug treatment programs. Disgusting. And it doesn't work. It works for some small percentage, but it doesn't work for most. That's for sure. And a lot of them die and they never lead productive, joyful lives. And the Taliban have a faith-based, I know I'm going to probably get pulled off YouTube for saying this, but it's true. I'm saying this as a Christian, not a Muslim. They have a faith-based, no-nonsense, zero intoxicant policy in their rehab, and it works, and ours doesn't.
Well, it's a really good point because Afghanistan...
If you think drugs are a serious problem, and I do because I've lived it and seen it, yeah, it's a serious point. It's a serious point that we should think about.
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, Afghanistan came to have the highest rates of drug use in the world, the highest addiction rate in the world, which is a tragedy and it's something that was foisted on them and is a source of profound misery and blight. And the Taliban's way of dealing with it once the U.S. left was to simply round up addicts. If they found them on the street, they would just put them onto buses and it was involuntary, take them to these detox wards where they're not given any kind of methadone or any kind of medication. They're just given, food, water, and a place to stay. And then they just wait it out. They're basically locked in there and they suffer through withdrawals. And then once they're sober, they're allowed to leave at that point. And it was amazing to me to see the hostility in the Western reaction to the Taliban's drug detox program. I mean, you can read all of these think tank pieces and all these NGOs where they're talking about how inhumane this is and so on. And
I've been through withdrawal from alcohol and it was so unpleasant and I did it alone. I'm not, I have not done anything extraordinary, but the one extraordinary thing I did go through that, man, I never drank it. You go through that. I mean, I know people relapse after going through withdrawals for sure, but I can just speak for myself and other people I know have done it. that's a pretty powerful incentive not to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think there's a cost to sort of easing people out of something. I mean, some withdrawal is life-threatening. Of course, you don't want to kill people. But opioid withdrawal is not life-threatening. It's just you just shit yourself a lot and feel terrible. I don't know. I can speak from experience. There's value in that. Like you'll never have another glass of vodka if you've gone through something like that. That was my feeling.
So let me ask you, would you like to see, police officers basically rounding people up?
Okay. If you're standing leaning against a trash can in the fentanyl haze, if you're tweaking your brains out and picking open wounds on your face from meth, that is it. You are in hell. You're dying. You're a fellow American. I have an obligation to help you. You're beyond helping yourself in the way that a toddler is beyond helping himself, in the way that a schizophrenic is beyond helping himself. You don't have reason. You don't have free will. And it's incumbent on me to love you through action. And we can argue about the details of treatment. I personally think that when possible and not physically dangerous, total withdrawal is the best way, having done it. But I also think bigger than that is you can't allow this and call yourself a decent society. You cannot allow this. This is hell. And anyone who doesn't think it's hell doesn't know anything about it. What if that was your daughter getting pimped out? You know what I mean? Like it's that ugly and you're from a city where it's just totally destroyed your downtown. But most American cities can say that and no one does anything. So yeah, tomorrow. This is a country where we force people to take the COVID vax. So don't lecture me about civil liberties, asshole. Sorry. Yeah, I do feel that way strongly. And how many addicts do I know personally who got sober in jail?
Yeah.
And they're grateful for that. And so when Nancy Pelosi starts talking about compassion, the partial birth abortion lady's talking to me about compassion. Fuck you, actually. Compassion? Look at your city. There's no compassion there. That's hate. Hate for your fellow citizens allowing this stuff. Sorry. Drugs are destroying America. And I say that as a former user of drugs and was very liberal on drugs, but I was wrong.
I should say I'm not a drug warrior. I don't believe in the war on drugs. I don't think drugs should be illegal. I think that they should be regulated rather than controlled rather than being a controlled substance that's totally illegal. But I'm inclined to your point of view about the rehabilitation of large numbers of drug users. I think that drugs are one of the most salient features of American society for the worse. And that we have as a country, we have a big drug problem. And you see that affecting the military, more than ever. And
yeah, I guess I shouldn't be, of course, you're absolutely right. It's like the thing about getting older is it's so hard to readjust your previous perceptions of things. But you're right. Of course, I should not be shocked that there's a drug problem in the military. There's a drug problem everywhere else. There's a drug problem in suburbia. There's a drug problem in the inner city. There's a drug problem in rural America. We just have drug problems in America, bottom line.
Let me say this in response to what you're saying about rounding people up and putting them into detox wards. I think that's better than arresting them and putting them in prison for using drugs.
Of course.
And probably cheaper too.
It's not even compared to what? How much aid have we sent to Israel to kill people in Gaza?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Money's not an issue.
Well, I mean, on some level it is an issue, but it's an expression of your priorities. What I spend money on in my family is an expression of what I care about.
Well, what I mean is
you should care about your own people and the kids who are literally standing there like this. Like, how can you allow that? Or people lying in their own feces on the sidewalk. That's so shameful. It's a mark of shame against all of us. Those are Americans. And I don't think we should put them in jail. I completely agree with you. That's not a crime as much as it's a tragedy. It's a crime against them. They're committing a crime against themselves.
Yeah.
Don't allow that. Would you allow your child, if you had a child who was addicted to fentanyl, standing like this, you'd be like, I'm going to chain you to the freaking radiator until you get better. I love you that much. Wouldn't you?
Yes.
Yes. We should love our fellow citizens that much. But we hate them. And we call it compassion. That's hate. It's not compassion. Sorry. Nothing bothers me more than that.
It is upsetting to see the degree of degradation in this country.
That's the word.
As a result of the drug industry.
They're human beings.
Yeah.
And they've been reduced to something less than human beings.
Yes. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. There's a lot of causes. And one of them is something we're really not here to talk about today, but it's the downward mobility that we see in our society and the lack of economic prospects that people have.
I strongly agree.
Especially if they don't have an elite education.
Yep.
The cost of housing. There's a lot of reasons why
I totally agree.
End up like zombies.
But you could also, yes, I say that often. I mean it sincerely. And we're a tiny number of the worst people are taking all the money. I totally agree with that. Oh, you're a socialist. No, I'm not. I'm an American who remembers a middle-class country, and I would like to have that again. That's it. Even though I'm not middle class, but anyway, whatever. Leaving that aside, you can say there are a lot of reasons your house is on fire, but the first response is to put it out. We probably should upgrade the electrical after this, or put a lightning rod on the roof, or whatever. We can take steps to prevent it happening again. But right now, you need hoses and water. And if you see Americans dying of drugs on the street, you have to stop that immediately. Those are human beings with souls. They're your countrymen.
And I think that, the government now under Trump, what they're trying to do is declare war on Mexican drug cartels or on the Venezuelan government. And this, I think, is totally misguided and will be ineffectual if they actually go through with it. Because,
well, certainly the Venezuela thing is a product of,
The thing is, we're talking about the complicity of the U.S. government in the international drug trade.
And you think that's real?
I definitely think that's real. And it's not what I was saying before. It's not, a top-down conspiracy where that's actually the purpose. It's a side effect of our imperialism and the permanent war paradigm. And in Mexico, I've spent a lot of time in Mexico before I was working on this book as a reporter, reporting on the drug wars there, the cartel wars there. And it's one thing, Trump can tell people, he can tell his voters, we're going to declare war on Mexican drug cartels. And people will buy into that because they see them, they as vicious criminals and murderers who are pumping drugs into this country. So it's easy to see why they would be for that. But
I feel that way. I see them that way.
The reality is that Mexican drug cartels don't really exist in the same way that we've been taught to believe in them by Netflix and Hollywood. In fact, there's a recent book. It's an academic book. It's not the easiest to read, but I think it has an important thesis. It's by a Mexican academic named Osvaldo Zavala, and it's called Drug Cartels Do Not Exist. What he means by that provocative thesis is that there are not the type of organizations that we see represented in shows like Narcos. Take El Chapo Guzman, for example, the famous drug lord who was captured, I guess, 2015-16. The U.S. government to date has seized no assets belonging to him. None. Why is that? I thought he was one of the world's richest men. He's on Forbes' list. He's one of the world's richest men.
No assets?
None, zero.
We reserve that only for Russian oligarchs.
Well, I don't think they can find any. They can't find any because the drug industry in Mexico is incredibly complex. The first thing to understand is that it's not a collection of organizations, it's a market. And the demand component of that market is in the United States. So people in this country wanting drugs is the battery that's running this whole thing. Because once there's that demand, suppliers inevitably arise to feed it. And in Mexico, those suppliers, yes, there are low-level traffickers. There are the disposable people who are bringing the drugs across the border, the disposable hitmen who are 14 years old and carrying out hits. But the real power behind the drug industry in Mexico is the military and the police, politicians, lawyers, deep-pocketed investors. They're the ones that are going in on drug trafficking ventures, essentially as joint ventures, as investments. It's much more organic and spontaneous than we're led to believe. The organization, to the extent that it exists, can be found in high-level, army generals or high-level police officers who are taking a cut from all the little fish who are swimming through certain drug trafficking routes. So the sort of idea that we have of a cartel where it's just bad guys hiding out in their lair, having meetings with the bosses, that just simply doesn't exist in Mexico.
So El Chapo, just to get back to the original example,
Mm-hmm.
Was described as a billionaire.
Mm-hmm.
We got what seemed like a pretty detailed accounting of the revenue. No, we didn't.
I mean, you're talking about the DEA and the DOJ. I mean, they are capable of manufacturing narratives. They're lawyers. They prosecutors. You know, they can put this stuff together and make this case. Look, I'm not saying that El Chapo wasn't a drug trafficker. He was. But he consistently acclaimed that he was a small fry, and he had like 4 guys with him at the time that he was arrested.
I thought he had like a private zoo with white lions. And
where is that? I haven't seen that. I've seen his pictures of his mom's house in Sinaloa. But there was that time that Sean Penn went to go visit him.
Yeah.
Did that look like the lair of a drug trafficker? He looked like an ignorant campesino up there. He had like chickens in cages and stuff. And he was clearly a very naive person when Sean Penn interviewed him. Like he was entrapped into this by a desire to give flowers to Kate Del Castillo, the Mexican actress who was with Sean Penn. I digress to some degree. The point is,
the bottom line is I just want you to say it again. The U.S. government nor the Mexican government has never confiscated any of this wealth.
That's right.
That we were told he had.
That's right. Because the real power behind the drug industry in Mexico is the political class that's like this with the United States security state. That is fun. That gets all of their, the Mexican army. Things have changed in Mexico, by the way. This is a moving target to discuss because Mexico, starting in 2018, has gone through profound political changes.
For sure. That would be the beginning of
AMLO, sure.
Of the AMLO period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, AMLO and then his successor, Claudia Sheinbaum. But at the bottom, especially in the northern states of Mexico along the Texas border,
yep,
I don't think so much has changed there. And if you just take a state like Tamaulipas, which is just south of Texas, which has probably the highest intensity of drug trafficking anywhere in the world, bringing it to the United States. Who are the real powers there? I mean, you could say it's the Gulf Cartel, or you could say it's Los Zetas. These are the organizations that we've been trained by the media to believe are the sort of puppet masters that are making all this happen.
Yeah. By the way, I bought that storyline totally.
Okay.
I mean, I have no other information. I don't speak Spanish. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I've just sort of assumed that was true.
The real drug traffickers there, the real power. The idea that we often also hear that the Mexican state is outgunned by drug traffickers.
Yes, I bought that too.
I made a comment about that earlier about how the high-powered weapons that they have. Yeah. There's some element of truth to that, but the reality is that the cartels are not a threat to the Mexican state. In fact, they're an appendage of the Mexican state in a certain way. And the elite class in Mexico, they're kind of a shadow paramilitary structure of, let's say, a state government, like the state government of Tamaulipas, and the police forces there, and the military divisions that are stationed there. And we're not going to go to war with those people because there are allies. I mean, people may not realize this, but there's close security cooperation between the U.S. and Mexico.
Yes.
I mean, they're armed. The Mexican army, we arm them. We give them their Black Hawk helicopters and their armored vehicles, and also the state police forces in the north of Mexico. We arm all of them, and they get training from the State Department and from American police officers and so on. And they're the real cartel, to the extent a cartel exists. And you can see that in other places in the world, notably in Colombia, where, it's changing there because they also have a new president. Latin America is changing rapidly in recent years. But in the past, for many years in Colombia, the Colombian federal government and the Colombian military have been the biggest most responsible for moving the most weight in drugs, I would say. And once again, they're closely backed by the U.S. government. So to bring it home and wrap up this point, you can say we're going to target drug cartels in Mexico. But the fact is, one, they have no idea who these people are, the people that they're setting up as drug traffickers. They may have developed some targets. To fight a war, you need not only political will, you need targets. That was a problem, incidentally, parenthetically, in Afghanistan. It was hard for them to develop targets there because it's such a big, remote country. Anyway, in Mexico, they're not going to be able to find those targets. And to the extent that they are, they're going to be people that are protected by the State Department and the CIA. And so it's just not going to happen. This drug war, war on Mexican drug cartels, I don't see it happening. And if it does, it'll be in the nature of very isolated strikes.
So what is the answer?
You have to address the demand. The demand is what's causing all this. So long as
can't anyone here's what I don't understand. Sobriety is good. Okay, sobriety is the key to joy and productivity and like having a useful life, making it worth being here.
I agree.
In the short period that we are. I believe that through much experience. I've never heard any leader in our country say that.
What I'm saying about Mexico?
No, about sobriety.
About sobriety.
The goal ought to be clear thinking, whatever, within the bounds of human nature, but like virtuous life. I don't know. Try to be clear-eyed, hardworking, decent, and sober. Like, there's no kind of goal set by our leaders. Like, maybe you shouldn't be wasted all the time. Maybe you should go off your freaking SSRIs, which make you impotent, by the way, or your benzodiazepines or your beer or your weed. Like, no one even says that.
I mean, I think they're all on drugs.
Everyone's on drugs.
I think the whole U.S. government's on drugs.
I totally agree.
I mean, look at the people at the highest level. I mean, don't want to cast just reckless aspersions, but here's something that's concrete. Rolling Stone, a magazine I've written for many years, reported on drug use in Trump's first White House. And in fact, Trump's personal doctor, Ronnie the Candyman Jackson, they called him, he was an admiral, if I'm not mistaken, in the Navy, a physician, who was demoted by the Navy for running an unlicensed pharmacy in the White House because he was giving Trump's people prescription drugs without a prescription and for free. And even if you're the president's personal physician, that's illegal. So there's evidence that all of those people were, and you see it in their behavior as well. And I'm not just picking on the Republicans here, because look at Kamala Harris, for example. I don't know her personally, and I can't say for sure, but did she seem like someone who was, taking a lot of prescription pills?
Yeah.
Well,
I worked for someone like that in television. It was the head of a network who, we used to joke, this person's on benzos, like just dead-eyed. I mean, you see that so much.
Talking nonsensically, like weird, laughing, weird reactions, people who just are not quite there in a certain way and seem kind of zonked out in a certain way.
Yes, that's the whole country.
That seems like a lot of our top leaders.
So my question is, why does no one ever mention that and just say, like, here's what the goal, we all fall short of the goal. It's not even judging. I'm not judging anybody. I'm not qualified to judge anybody, but like, I do think it's important to articulate the goal. And why shouldn't someone say the goal is sobriety?
Again, I'm not here to be a drug warrior or paternalistic or to lecture people who struggle with substance abuse, but I certainly agree with you that we should be a value.
But you should know, Seth, that the real danger is Sharia law. Sharia law. And you can tell when you go to a place like Abu Dhabi or Riyadh, like, oh man, I hope we don't ever wind up with a society like this with a rape rate of 0, where you leave your keys in your Lamborghini and don't ever worry about it being stolen. And, if people want to get wasted, they do it at home. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I don't.
Boy, I hope we don't wind up with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, Sharia law is obviously just a punchline. I don't know that too many people actually believe in the reality of that. And sure, like I said, I'm a lawyer. I actually studied legal philosophy.
Right.
Sharia is not that different from other legal codes. A lot of our own legal code, the Anglo-Saxon common law, Anglo-American common law, derives ultimately from religious authorities.
Hope so.
There's a lot of universal
exactly.
There's a lot of universal values in
Hammurabi's code is recognizable. I wouldn't want to live under it. It's kind of punitive, but it's not like from another planet.
Mm-hmm.
The oldest legal code that we have, Hammurabi's code, it's not like, you sort of know what he's talking about, right?
Look, I agree, yeah. And look, they put up 10 commandments in front of I live in Austin, Texas, and they put up the 10 commandments in front of the state capitol. And that's controversial among, religious libertarians. But I'm of the view that I'm happy to see them put the 10 commandments up there if they would just follow them,
Right. I agree.
Starting with thou shalt not kill.
I couldn't agree more. So let me just put a bow on this really super interesting conversation. Thank you. With the question, like, how were your interactions during the 2.5 years you were writing this or more, with like DOD, for example, with the Pentagon? Like, you must have called over there to the PIOs and said, I have the list of following questions. Like, how did they respond to you?
In general, they just didn't respond. And I was in touch with them just yesterday because Politico is publishing an excerpt of the book. And so we had to go back to them again for comment. And the fact that it involves Delta Force, the fact that it involves a special mission unit, they said that explicitly in the response that I got from USASOC yesterday. They said, because your question implicates a special mission unit, our policy is to not comment. So for the most part, they didn't give me anything. I was on my own. But
so here you have a documented case of one of their guys murdering someone in his house.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there was drug trafficking. There was indisputably drug use, narcotic use by federal employees, and they don't have to answer any of your questions because the missions are shrouded in secrecy.
Yes, that's right. In general, that's right. I will say, I try not to be, I try to be fair when possible, or to give credit where credit is due. There was a case where the Senate Armed Services Committee questioned the commander of SOCOM, which is an umbrella formation above JSOC and above all these units. Yeah. Questioned him in a Senate committee, about my reporting for Rolling Stone, and asked him to address, the cases of drug trafficking and unsolved murders. And General Brian Fenton, who at the time was the commander of SOCOM, said that he was concerned about it, said that it was unacceptable, said that they were laser focused on eradicating it. But whether those sentiments that they expressed to members of Congress was actually backed up with real action, I don't know.
Do you see the possibility of reform?
I don't think that I'm very critical in this book of every single presidential administration since 2001. Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden. None of them I give a pass to any of them. But I do see Trump's influence here to be uniquely negative because of the way that he surrounds himself with some of the craziest people in the special operations community, elevates these people who among their own colleagues are considered loose cannons, not credible. There's the case of Eddie Gallagher, where Trump made it such a big part of his brand to defend this disgrace to the Navy SEALs, who was turned in by his own teammates for killing a bunch of people for no reason. You're talking about guys who are not bleeding heart liberals by any stretch of the imagination. They're there with Chief Gallagher next to him, seeing what he's doing, and they're not okay with it. They turn him in. The command wants nothing to do with Gallagher. They also think that he's an embarrassment and a disgrace and a murderer. But Trump intervenes to prevent him from losing his trident, and Trump touts him, and he becomes this big influencer and so forth. So that type of incredible irresponsibility and malignancy on Trump's part, his uniquely malignant influence as commander-in-chief, I think augurs very poorly for the possibility of reform, at least in the next 3 years.
Well, you want honest, competent, decent military because, it's the purest expression of power that a government has, the power to kill people. And you have to think that they're operating on a different and elevated moral plane. They can't just be like an outlaw state. You know what I mean?
Yes, that's what I was saying before about the founding of the U.S. Army 250 years ago. It is a core institution for our country, for our nation. So to see the degree of decline, it's everywhere, possible to observe. It's very concerning. And I really don't think people are aware of the degree to which the military is incapable of fulfilling its functions. I don't know that you can say that the U.S. has the most powerful military in the world anymore. I think that a strong case could be made that China has a more competent military, even though they have never been in combat. They have totally untested. So there's a big caveat there. But just looking on the surface, I don't think Chinese soldiers are trafficking drugs and killing each other. I don't think Chinese soldiers are dropping dead from fentanyl overdoses right and left. And also, China has a much bigger army than us, while our army is shrinking to a degree that's really shocking. They're really running out of people. This year, recruiting was a little bit better, but you're still talking about, a long, long deficit in recruiting. The Army's never been smaller than it is right now. They can't get qualified helicopter pilots, let's say, as we saw so, tragically demonstrated over the Potomac River in January. So I think that, beyond just the drugs, there's a lot of reasons to be concerned, about the health and viability of the U.S. military in general.
Boy, that's a sad story. Seth Harp, thank you very much for that.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. So it turns out that YouTube is suppressing this show. On one level, that's not surprising. That's what they do. But on another level, it's shocking. With everything that's going on in the world right now, all the change taking place in our economy and our politics, with the wars we're on the cusp of fighting right now, Google has decided you should have less information rather than more. And that is totally wrong. It's immoral. What can you do about it? Well, we could whine about it. That's a waste of time. We're not in charge of Google. Or we could find a way around it, a way that you could actually get information that is true, not intentionally deceptive. The way to do that on YouTube, we think, is to subscribe to our channel. Subscribe. Hit the little bell icon to be notified when we upload and share this video. That way you'll have a much higher chance of hearing actual news and information. So we hope that you'll do that.